Welcome to an installment of CCSD Living Environment. Today we're going to talk about ecology. Remember, with any of the ologies, we're dealing with the study of. With ecology, we're talking about the study of the interaction of organisms with the living and non-living things in their environment. So no matter which organism we're talking about, we need to look at the living things that are there and the non-living things in that environment and how they all interact together. The one thing for you to keep in mind is that no organism can exist on its own as one single entity. Everything is dependent on each other. Everything has a place in the environment. Nothing is distinct and separate from everything else. So when we refer to those species in their environment, really what we're talking about is a population. We're familiar with the population of humans in the United States, and every 10 years we go through and do a census. The idea with the census is to say, okay, how many people are in the United States? How many people are in your town or village? We could do the same thing with, say, the gray squirrels in your backyard. We could go through and determine how many of them are actually there. It makes sense for people to do it every 10 years. With squirrels, it could be every season, it could be every year, depending on what it is that you're looking for. So the population is all of the organisms of one specific species in one specific place. So we could look at all the brown mice in a forest. No population can ever exist alone. So to go along with that, not only are we talking about the brown mice in the forest, we're talking about the insects, the wildflowers, the snakes, the hawks, the owls, everything that's in that forest all has to do with each other. So if we're going to talk about all of those things, then we need to go one step bigger. And instead of just referring to a population, we need to talk about a community. A community really is all of the populations in one area. So again, a population is one species in one area. The community is all of the populations in that same area. So with the community, what we're dealing with is how they all interact together. Just those living species. So really, when we're studying ecology, what we're studying is an ecosystem, an ecological system. So what is it that we're looking at? We're looking at the living and the non-living parts of the environment. And how do they interact with each other? So ecology, in essence, is the study of an ecosystem. And an ecosystem is that interaction of the living and the non-living members inside your environment. So what are the factors to an ecosystem? We have two main factors in an ecosystem. The first being the biotic factors. Remember, bio, that prefix means living or life. So the biotic factors are the living parts of an environment that directly or indirectly affect that environment. So all of the organisms that are there, their parts, their pieces, their interactions, their waste products, everything that they have and how that is in the environment, those are the biotic factors we have to deal with. So if we have the living pieces, we have to have the non-living pieces. The non-living pieces would be our abiotic factors. The abiotic factors would be any physical or chemical factor that would affect the ability of the organism to live and reproduce. It's not just about whether you can live in your environment, it's about whether the conditions are right so you can reproduce in your environment. Whether you can take the things that you have found to allow you to survive and pass those on to your offspring so that they're able to survive. So it's really not just about living. It really has to do with living and reproducing. Because at that point, then you have continuation of the species. Some of those abiotic factors that we need to look at or consider are the amount of water, or H2O, the intensity of the light, the type of soil, the range of temperatures, which isn't just important for plants, but it's important to animals too. Certain animals can only live under certain temperature conditions. The pH, is it acidic? Is it basic? The availability of minerals. And the amount of gases like oxygen, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen. All of those factors, all of those non-living or abiotic factors play a huge role in the survival of species in their environment. So if we talk about those abiotic factors for a minute, in certain cases, those abiotic factors actually limit how organisms can survive in that environment. So if I asked you, what does that word limit mean? Most of you would probably respond that you're slowing down or you're not allowing something to happen. With a limiting factor, there's a specific set of conditions, could be biotic or abiotic, in an organism's environment that determines where that organism can live or the size of the population itself. So a good example of that would be light in water. We know that plants can grow in an ocean, but can they grow in the bottom of an ocean? And you'd tell me, no, there's no plants in the bottom of an ocean. Well, the question is, why not? Why are there no plants there? And the simple answer to that is because there's no light. We know plants need light. We know plants need light for photosynthesis. Well, if the light can't penetrate, if the intensity of the light isn't strong enough to get through the water, then you can't have plants at the bottom of the ocean. So light becomes a limiting factor to plants growing in the water. Now, we could say the same thing for temperature conditions on land. We're all familiar with kind of what organisms live in certain places. We know what organisms live in a desert. Lizards do pretty well in a desert. They've got that all figured out. But if we took a lizard and we threw him in the Arctic or we brought him to Antarctica, that'd be it for the lizard. Because the things that lizard needs, like temperature, isn't there. So that abiotic factor is limiting the fact that those organisms can't live in that environment. Which kind of takes us to this idea of evolution. And we need to understand that evolution occurs by natural selection, which is a process where the organism best adapted to the environment can survive. Organisms have to obtain their biotic and abiotic resources from the environment they're living in. If your environment doesn't have what you need to survive, then you can't live in that environment. Organisms can't get things if they're not there. So really, this concept of natural selection and how evolution takes place ties into the environmental conditions.